Good. And all the time. Thank you again for joining us today for worship, whether you're here in person or whether you're at home watching online. I'm Pastor Josh, and today we will be continuing our summer-long sermon series, On the Run. Hopefully, it has been a fun few weeks, and hopefully, we have been moved to think deeper about our relationship with God and the people around us by the stories and the scriptures that we have been able to focus on. I hope everyone had a fun 4th of July. Did anyone get a chance to see the new Indiana Jones movie? Well, I didn't either, but I bring it up because it reminds me of one of the older Indiana Jones movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and today we're going to be spending quite a bit of time talking about the Ark. When I was little, I remember thinking how cool it was that Indiana Jones was exploring and trying to find treasure, and I think at one point I even wanted to be Indiana Jones and even wanted to find the Ark of the Covenant myself. But I hope everyone had a good 4th of July and got to spend time with their families, got to relax a little bit. It seems as though the summer is flying by. We are already here at week 6 of an 11-week sermon series that will take us through the middle of August. So I want to give a quick recap about where we began and what has led us up to this point. We began our series entitled On the Run, which is a sermon series about the life of David. In 1 Samuel, we learned how God is working even when people are failing, how he loves working on unlikely people, and my favorite part of how Reuben described it is when he reminded us that God often works in us before he works through us. He loves working, we learned the story of David and Goliath and how a shepherd killed a giant that had challenged King Saul to send a warrior to fight him for 40 days, and how no one would fight Goliath. But armed with only a sling and a stone, David defeated the mighty warrior in Goliath, and we focused on our approach to life in seemingly giant moments, and how, by God's power, David was able to overcome a giant, which gave us perspective on where and who we need to turn to when we are faced with giant obstacles. Spoiler alert, David will have a few more giant moments to come. Almost as quickly as David defeated Goliath, Saul begins to see David as a threat to his kingdom. David continues to be victorious in all his battles, and King Saul keeps sending him into battles, hoping that he will eventually be killed. But David keeps winning and becomes increasingly popular. Even Jonathan's own son and David become basically best friends. Saul continues to try to kill David multiple times, and David is helped to escape by Saul, Jonathan's son. Eventually, even Saul's daughter, Michal, who was given to be married to David, helps him escape again from Saul's men that were once again sent to kill him. David continues to try to elude Saul, and Saul continues to try to chase down David to kill him. Until we get to 1 Samuel 24, where David sneaks up behind Saul, and he says, "Oh, I could have killed you," but he doesn't. Instead of killing Saul, he cuts off a piece of his robe, and he says, "Everyone told me that I should kill you, but I didn't." And so they sit and they talk and they agree and they make a covenant that they will no longer be enemies. And part of the covenant is David is to show mercy on Saul's family. In chapter 25, Samuel dies, and it's almost without notice, but it kind of signals a time of transition for Israel. Saul and his 3 sons eventually die in battle against the Philistines on Mount Gilboa at the end of 1 Samuel in chapter 31. And that brings us to where we pick up today in 2 Samuel in chapter 6. Now, David decides to bring the ark to Jerusalem. And this story reminds me a bit of a story of my own. Many of you know my daughter, Johanna. She's 17 months now, almost 18 months, about a year and a half. And I remember a time when she was only 6 months old. We started, and I mean by we, her mom started planning her first birthday. This was going to be a big party or a big celebration. I almost think the planning started even before she was 6 months old. Now I thought, and obviously incorrectly, that this was just going to be her first birthday party. So although it was going to be fun, we would just have a few friends and a few people over. She wasn't going to remember it, so no big deal in making a huge celebration. Well, again, I was wrong, and Jackie had it different in mind for Johanna's first birthday. That first birthday was going to be special. It was going to be full of anticipation and celebration. She wasn't just going to have one cake, she was going to have 2 cakes. One of the cakes would be made just so she could smash it. She wasn't going to eat it. It was specifically for smashing. Apparently, this is a big thing. People call them smash cakes. The baby smashes the cake. They get all covered in it. You get to take fun pictures. It's a thing that people do. So as we got closer to her birthday, which was still a few months away, the decision was made that we would go to El Paso. This is where we were both from and where most of our family still lives. So it made sense that having all of the people come here, we would go there for the smash cake. This would make things a bit more complicated. We had already accumulated lots of decorations and party favors, things that we would have to transport to El Paso. There was going to be a lot more moving parts than I originally thought about, but it was still going to be great. We were having a party at the church that Jackie grew up in. It was going to be a wonderful celebration. We were so happy that Johanna was brought into our life, and after a wonderful year, we were going to celebrate it. Well, after months of planning and excited anticipation, the day was finally here, and Johanna was sick. She was so sick, and I felt so bad for her. A day or two before her birthday, she came down with the worst cold that she had ever had in her whole first year of life. She was throwing up, and I had never seen this before. Of course, she had spit up on me, things that babies do all the time. But this was different. She was throwing up, and I was scared. And so we wound up taking her to the emergency room. I'm sure that being first-time parents added to the stress of this situation. And so after we took her to the emergency room, we assured that she was okay and that, in essence, she just had a cold or a bug, and eventually she would be fine. So we decided to continue with the party and the celebration. We had come all this way, and we wanted to give her the big party. All of her relatives wanted to give her a big celebration, and I think that Jackie truthfully might have even been planning in her mind before Johanna was even born. The big day arrives, and Johanna is still sick, but she is a trooper. We decide to have the party anyway. At this time, there are nearly 100 people from both sides of our family at this party, and we are setting up for the party, and there are 20 different people doing 20 different things. People are putting down table covers and hanging piñatas. People were finishing preparing food. Jackie's brother had smoked several briskets. They was all being sliced, and people were cutting fruit, and there was just tons of stuff happening. We finally get set up, and we go to the church for the big celebration, and Johanna seems to be, at this moment, maybe at the sickest point of her time. We're in my truck on the way there, and it sounds as if she's taking these extremely labored breaths mixed with pain, and me and Jackie were so worried. I remember we got to the parking lot, and there was a moment when we looked each other in the eye, and we were about this close from going back to the emergency room. Luckily, we had both of our parents there, both sides, and they were much more seasoned at this kind of thing. In fact, they had raised us, so, they must know a little bit about what they were doing. So after all the planning and all the excitement and all the anticipation for what was going to be the biggest celebration of Johanna's life, she was just sick, and she was just tired, and she just wanted to sleep. When it came time to sing happy birthday and to blow out her candles and to smash the cake, which we had practiced blowing out the candles for weeks, she didn't blow out the candles. She didn't smash the cake. Some days, no matter how carefully we plan and how carefully we orchestrate events, things just have a way of going wrong. This is the way it happened for King David. David had it in his heart to retrieve the Ark of the Covenant from where it was being kept, privately in the home of Abinadab at Kiriath Jearim. And we are told in 1 Chronicles that David carefully consulted the leaders of nations. So this was an action taken by the whole nation. But as we learned, even though this was well thought out and well planned, sometimes things just go wrong. If you'd like to turn to your Bible now, we're going to be at our first verse, which is from 2 Samuel chapter 6. And it begins, David again brought together all the young men of Israel, 30,000. He and all his men went to Baalah in Judah to bring up there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherub on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, who lived on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of the God on it. And Ahio was walking in front of it, and David and all of Israel were celebrating with their might before the Lord, with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. This is a big moment for David. David initiates this procession of the ark to Jerusalem. And this is significant on many levels. The transfer of the ark serves as a way to legitimize David's rule as king. And if you're asking yourself now, why is the transfer of the ark so important? Or why would transferring it or moving it change anything? The Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of the Lord, houses the 2 stone tablets on which the 10 Commandments are inscribed. These tablets were given to Moses by God on Mount Sinai and represent the covenant of God and the Israelites. It is also said that the ark held Aaron's staff, which showed God's approval for Aaron as a high priest, and the ark also held a jar of manna, the bread that God gave the Israelites to sustain them during their wandering in the desert after the exodus from Israel, showing and symbolizing God's provision. The Ark of the Covenant comes from the Hebrew Aron Habrit, meaning chest of the covenant. In Exodus, we're told about the specifics of the ark. Have them make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. And Pastor reminded us earlier in our sermon series that a cubit is about the length from your elbow to the tip of your middle finger. It's about 18 inches. So it was about 3.75 by 2.25 in feet. So it's pretty big. Overlay it with pure gold, both inside and out, and make gold molding around it. Cast 4 gold rings and fasten them to the 4 feet, with 2 rings on one side and 2 rings on the other. Then make poles of acacia wood, overlay them with gold, insert 2 poles onto the sides of the ark, and carry it. The poles are to remain in the ark. The poles are to remain in the rings of the ark, and they are not to be removed. Then put the ark and the tablets, the covenant law, which I give you. Make an atonement cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide, and make 2 cherubim out of hammered gold at the ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub on one end and the second cherub on the other, and make the cherub of one piece with the cover at the 2 ends. The cherub are to have their wings spread upward, overshadowing the cover with them. The cherubim are to face each other, looking towards the cover, and place the cover on top of the ark, and put the ark and the tablets, the covenant of law that I will give you, there above the cover, between the 2 cherubim that are over the ark and the covenant law. I will meet with you here and give you all of my commandments for the Israelites. So we learn here in Exodus that the ark is a place where the people could meet with God. They call the lid the mercy seat. The mercy seat represents God's presence among his people. It symbolizes the tangible presence of God among his people. Just as the ark was central to worship and spiritual life, so too should we recognize the importance of seeking God's presence in our lives today. The first lesson we learned today is about God's presence. God's presence in our life is a powerful thing. So enough on my tangent about how important the ark is. Back to the story in Samuel. So David gets 30,000 chosen men. Converse has 30,000 people in it. It's a city about 15 miles northeast of downtown. That's a lot of people to put together. It was a celebration. It was a big celebration. I think back to Johanna's party, and that maybe had a little over 100 people. This had 30,000. So they set out to Baalah in Judah to bring the ark. And the ark is possibly, at this point, the most sacred symbol of God. And by setting out to take it to Jerusalem, he is linking the kingship of God to David's rule. And by that connection, links the protection of Israel to God's anointed king. Taking it to Jerusalem will serve as a public ritual to inaugurate Jerusalem as the royal capital and also as a religious center for Israel. David and all of Israel were celebrating with their might before the Lord, with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. David's exuberant anticipation and joy-filled celebration demonstrated his unwavering faith and eager anticipation of encountering God's presence. Do we wait in eager anticipation of encountering God's presence today? How many of us woke up this morning and thinking, how can I encounter God's presence today? It is a joyful and triumphant procession for God, who is responsible for the victories against the Philistines. But the procession is interrupted. Sometimes things just have a way of going wrong. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore, God struck him down, and he died beside the ark of God. Now, this seems shocking to some degree. It seems like Uzzah was just walking alongside the cart, helping to guide and protect it, when it was about to fall because the ox stumbled, and he probably instinctually tries to save it from crashing down, and God strikes him down. Uzzah is dead, and the celebration comes to a screeching halt. Sometimes things just have a way of going wrong. But it shows us that the ark possesses great holiness and great power, and it reminds us that it is not to be treated casually. This part of the text does not go into why this happened, but it is a good place to think about our second lesson, and that it is God is holy, and he must be worshiped with reverence. And although we are kind of left to figure out on our own why God strikes down Uzzah, if we look back, we can kind of find lessons about it and how we can apply those to our own lives today. We learned in Exodus about the construction of the ark and how it was to be carried. In Exodus it says, "You shall make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. You shall put the poles into the rings on the side of the ark to carry them. The poles shall remain in the rings of the ark, and they shall not be removed from it. You shall put into the ark the testimony which I shall give you, and you shall make a mercy seat of pure gold." So if you remember from verse 3, it says they put the ark on a new cart. Well, I can imagine they did this because the ark must have been heavy. And I tried to look up how much it weighed, and I came across a couple different things. But most accounts says it weighed upwards of 750, maybe even 1,000 pounds. So it was going to be extremely heavy, and I can imagine that no one really wanted to carry it. So they decided to put it on a cart and let the ox carry it. I remember when I was younger and I had to do chores or homework, I would always find a way to try to outsmart or to somehow circumvent the process, so the job was easier. I remember as a kid, when I was told to clean my room, you would kick the clothes or the toys under your bed, and you would go tell your parents, "I've cleaned my room." Well, you didn't really clean your room, you just kind of circumvented the rules. And I did this again later in my life. I think I might have been a sophomore probably in high school, because I was in geometry. And we had a big final class project, and the class project was you were to get a big sheet of paper, and your group was to trace someone's silhouette on the paper, and you were to put a series of circles and triangles and fill up the inside of the outline that you had made of yourself, and you were to subtract the area inside that from the area of the whole paper, and you would find out how much space you were taking up inside the paper. Well, me and my friends decided to circumvent the rules, and so what we did was we cut out the shape of ourselves. So we weighed the paper initially, and then we cut out the shape of ourselves, and we weighed that. We created an equation, an algebraic equation, where we were able to find the answer. We turned it in, and sure enough, even though we were right, our teacher failed us, and we learned our lessons about trying to circumvent the rules. One of my favorite quotes of all time, and I don't know where it came from, but it's written on my dry erase board at home, is, "Do the hard things, and life is easy." This also kind of reminds me of a Bible verse from Matthew, where Matthew talks about taking the road with the narrow gate. "For the gate that is broad leads to destruction, but if you go through the gate that is narrow, it leads to life. And few go through the narrow gate, as many goes through the wide gate." So maybe we should listen to Matthew and take the road with the narrow gate. Uzzah's dying initially upsets David greatly. And the text says David was even angry. David was afraid of the Lord, and that day he said, "How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me?" He was not willing to take the ark to the Lord to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. David now is afraid of having a dangerous holy object in his city. So they stop the procession, and the ark stays in the house of Obed-Edom. And the ark stays there for 3 months. And we are told that his house is filled with blessings at this time. Verse 12, "Now King David was told, 'The Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of the ark of God.'" When David receives the word that Obed-Edom's house had been blessed, he resumes the procession. This time, when they start, they take 6 steps and sacrifice a bull, and a fattened calf, and they begin their journey to the city of David in celebration. In verse 14, it says, wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, while he and all of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sounds of trumpets. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window, and when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. With the great ceremony of the ark of the Lord was placed in its new home in Jerusalem and in a new tent. I decided I like the ark of the Lord more than the ark of the covenant because it highlights God's presence in the ark. So they bring the ark into a special tent sanctuary that David had pitched, and they burn offerings, and they have offerings of well-being and fellowship that were offered. David blesses the people in the name of the Lord, and then he gives a loaf of bread and a cake of dates and a cake of raisins to each person in the whole crowd, a fitting end to a procession worthy of Israel's victorious God. God's enthroned presence represented by the ark that now resides in David's city. Truly a time of celebration for David. When David returns home to bless his household, Michal, Saul's daughter, comes out to meet him, and she sarcastically says, "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked, in full view of the slave girls of his servants, as any vulgar fellow would do." The fact that she comes out to meet him shows that she had not been participating in the celebration. Michal was given to David in marriage after he had killed the 200 Philistines that Saul had sent him out, trying and hoping that Saul would die. But when Saul was, when he became a fugitive, Michal was given another husband, a man named Palti, and they were married, and Michal eventually becomes in love with Palti. So David asked for Michal's marriage to be restored with him, and so it is said that when she was taken away from Palti, she was carried away weeping. So we can imagine that at this point, even though her and Saul are reunited, that she is not 100% together with Saul, at least in her heart. And this kind of seems to be the final straw for anything that has to do with Saul's lineage. David eventually says to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from this house when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people, Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes." Today's final lesson, God wants us to worship him wholeheartedly. King David exemplified wholehearted worship as he danced in joy and celebration before the Lord. His passionate expression of love and gratitude revealed his complete devotion to God. David's worship was not restrained by societal norms or by personal inhibitions. Rather, he laid bare his heart, pouring out his adoration for God without reservation. I invite the praise band to come up as we finish. Wholehearted worship requires surrendering our hearts completely to God. It means letting go of our own desires, agendas, and distractions, and allowing God to have full control over our lives. It is an act of submission, acknowledging that he alone is worthy of our devotion. Wholehearted worship calls for authenticity and transparency before God. It involves being honest about our joys, our struggles, our sorrows, our offerings, and being true to ourselves and to him. God desires our genuine expression of worship, where we bring our whole being before him, flaws, doubts, and all. Wholehearted worship is marked by gratitude and love for God. It is our response to his abundant grace, mercy, and faithfulness in our lives. We express our thankfulness for who he is and what he has done, recognizing his goodness and faithfulness even in the midst of challenges. And sometimes things just have a way of going wrong. Church, may we embrace wholehearted worship, surrendering ourselves to God and offering him our genuine praise and adoration. And as we remove distractions and cultivate a heart of reverence, we create a space for God to move into our lives. Worship is not just confined to our Sunday service, but poured out into everything we do. So may we go out this week in the Spirit.